Hi, I'm Matt and welcome back to Soil Lab. You might remember one of our recent videos on starter fertilizers, and if you haven't taken the opportunity to watch that yet, please follow the link in the description below and check out how this study's set up. Just to give you that 10,000 foot view of what we did and look at a couple of the treatments here, we wanted to compare an untreated control to a nitrogen and potassium fertilizer to a more traditional starter fertilizer that also contains phosphorus. We did this in a native soil, and what you see in front of me here, this is in a cleaned sand soil that had a really low nutrition status to start with. So in our last video, we saw the above ground growth, understood the experimental design. Now we want to dive below ground and also collect some data so that we can see what those nutrient levels are with a MySoil test. Here on the left, just to recap that above ground growth, we have our untreated control. You can see it's a thin stand, it's not very green, it's not very thick compared to our fertilized treatments. Here in this sandy soil, we really see the importance of phosphorus in our starter fertilizers when that phosphorus is deficient. A lot darker green, a lot denser, a lot better turf quality with this starter fertilizer than the other in our low nutrient soil. Let's go ahead and jump below ground and see if that translates to our root mass as well. We're going to start worst first and start with our untreated control and look at our rooting mass. So you can see we compressed that root zone just a little bit, but we do have good root collection on this untreated control. As we look, we see very little above ground growth. Now, we're gonna do our best to root wash it here, but don't be surprised if this one falls apart just a little bit on us. But this is a great look at how our below ground and above ground growth seem to be pretty reflective of one another so far. Let's go ahead and jump into the wash tank and see what we get. As I'm washing this, I'm trying to do it with some support, knowing that this is a pretty low root mass, and certainly that's what I'm seeing here as well. You can see many of those fibrous roots of the grasses have fallen off already. So not only is this root mass appearing to be pretty small, it's also appearing to be relatively physically weak as well. Well, like we oftentimes see, we just have to work with what we've got, and we don't got much right there. So let's go ahead and take a look at our next treatment, which is our fertilizer that contains nitrogen and potassium, but lacks that phosphorus that we have in our starter fertilizer. So there's a great look at that untreated control versus our non-starter fertilizer that lacked phosphorus. I'm going to be really excited to see if that vigor on top translates to that vigor below in our starter fertilizer treatment. Now we always try to have apple-to-apple comparison here. Realize I struggled getting this sample a little bit, but it's pretty apparent to me just at a glance here, and we'll dry them down and have a better look, that we've got significantly better root mass here than we have on either of the other two treatments, showing us that in this phosphorus deficient soil, certainly that starter fertilizer was the go-to. I know you've already seen this in the video that we've already produced, but just look at how much less of a difference there is across treatments here versus in our sand. So this is our native silt loam soil. It's a medium textured soil that had a really good nutrient base to start before we seeded these about 6 weeks ago. So we're not seeing as big of differences, but I'm really curious to see if that phosphorus added has any of the below ground differences that maybe we're not seeing above ground. Let's dive below with the profile and see what we learn. Well, based on what we just learned with our other profiling tool, we're going to switch tools to try to get a better sample in our silt loam soil here. So we'll again start with our untreated control. As you take a look here, even before the wash, you can see good root mass here at depth. And remember, this is our untreated control in this study that didn't receive any starter fertilizer, but did have a good nutrient base to start. So here we're looking at our treatment that lacked phosphorus but got nitrogen and potassium fertilizer. All right, and our last treatment of the day today is going to be our starter fertilizer treatment. Ultimately, I want you to be the judge here. Comment below what you're thinking, but here's what I'm seeing. In our sand treatment, I saw there was definitely a difference when we used fertilizer versus when we didn't, and I'd argue that the root mass was probably a little bit better when we used that starter fertilizer. And remember, we did our best in getting these samples, but certainly left a few roots behind. Now that's true here as well in our native soil. We inevitably left a few roots behind, but you be the judge, but I'm not seeing a real significant difference here where we had a good nutrient base to start with. We did see better color and vigor above ground, but I don't necessarily see a huge significant difference below ground. Why do we care? Well, I think why we care is we might not always need a starter fertilizer, even though it might be allowed in your state at the time of seeding, overseeding, or if a soil test indicates so. My thought is when that soil test tells us we need phosphorus, let's fertilize to that phosphorus. And when it tells us we have adequate phosphorus, we really do and probably don't need to add that element that could potentially move off site. In addition to that concern of it moving off site, it could just be a few extra dollars that you keep in your pocket, not paying for that extra nutrient that you don't need right now. Now that you've seen the above ground differences as well as the below ground differences, we hope that this information, this data, this demonstration helps drive decisions in your lawn. I'll look forward to seeing you again soon in the lab.